Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In a Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes now. We have an amazing guest with TJ to talk about space and how to prevent the next collision and how to deal with all the junk in space and the growth of space that's been so incredible in the last few years. So stay tuned. We're going to get started in about 4 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In a Nick of Time. We're very lucky today. We're going to have a very special guest, TJ, joining us to talk about space and space collision, but also how to deal with the massive growth of space and the space industry and what's going to come next. Also, when it comes to the next engagements with against China and Russia, particularly looking at the space domain, obviously. So that's going to be a very interesting discussion. If you've not yet subscribed to the show, please do that. Go to inanicoftime.tv and you're going to be able to get an email a week to notify you of the next episodes. Always interesting to keep up and make sure you get notified because obviously social media companies are not always doing their jobs. So you want to be able to get an email to be keeping up with what's going on. With that, if you have not yet seen Ask Sage, please go check it out. We have now 25 or 2,400, I think, now government teams on the platform in 2.5 months. Pretty insane, massive growth. It's bringing GPT to government teams, but accelerating and also making it, agnostic to the model. So we have different options with OpenAI GPT 3.4. 354, 432K, DaVinci Cohere. We're going to have Google Bard. We're going to have Dolly. So many options to pick from. We're going to bring it to the high side as well with Dolly and Cohere as well with a great engagement with Amazon and then Microsoft on the OpenAI side. So a lot of great things happening. So if you want to check it out, it ties to your API data lakes. It can really ingest data and do it all the way to CUI right now. So go check it out. We have a special coupon code, Let's Beat China, with a 25 bucks a month offering instead of 30 forever. So only 1,000 users will be able to get that. We're almost at the number, by the way, so you better hurry before that's gone. With that, very excited to introduce you guys to TJ Koury. He's the CEO of Digital Arsenal, but he's also the senior space system engineer at Lightworks Automation Systems. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in Engineering, Core Military History from the U.S. Air Force Academy. He has a very extensive background, as you'll see, in space system engineering, supporting both the DoD and the IC in the technical development and support role that he had with analytical graphics and Cito Corporation. He has a very amazing experience leading development teams and creating innovative solutions, as you'll see, including the ground up rewrite of the space track.org following the 2009 Iridium Kosmos collision. Really, that's been enabling the U.S. government to share the assessment messages with the community, the space community, and he has created also the great space data standards with the spacedatastandards.org, which is a framework for defining standards for space data based on the CCSDS standards. And you'll see that some of these, data formats have been really stuck in time, obviously, for 40, 50 plus years. And so, having an engagement where we can bring them to modern times is obviously always needed. Before that, TJ served in the U.S. Air Force, where he held many positions, including the Chief of Ground System Engineering and White Brand Global Satellite Engineer / Chief of Procedures at the 3rd Space Operations Squadron in Colorado Springs. And he also served as a Weapon and Tactic Officer and an Echo Crew Commander. With that, let's welcome TJ. TJ, welcome to the show. You're muted. Sorry. Here we go. You need to unmute.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, no, so excited to have you. Like we talked about, obviously, very extensive background in space. People are going to want to know more about what you've done. So we always start with, the journey of our guests. So we're going to let you go ahead and do that.
Sure. So when I graduated the Air Force Academy, I went into space operations. I was at a Schriever Air Force Base, and there I got a a very good education in how satellite operations work, also some of the challenges with using space data for day-to-day ops on a live satellite constellation. While I was there, we would basically upload some of our object positional data to Microsoft Outlook and send some emails, and we would get some responses back from at the time. It was called the JSPOC, and now they've renamed it with Space Force. But they would respond to us from one space and say, "Okay, thanks for your positional data. In the next 5 days, here are all the objects that are going to be really close to your satellites in case you need to get out of the way, in case you need to do maneuvers to make sure that they're not going to interfere with your operations." So in 2008, when I separated from the Air Force, I actually went out to California to support the satellite catalog operations and the newly stood up staff that they had out there that was responsible for doing all these screenings. And while I was there, I realized that the hardware that Space Force was using to do all of these calculations was 30 to 40 years old. They were using old IBM mainframes and a bunch of computers in a kind of an ad hoc network that were the same vintage as the computers used to create the special effects for the first Jurassic Park movie, which I thought was neat, but it was a living museum, and at the time it limited the amount of assessment they could do, the number of objects they could screen, and also the computers were that old, but so were the data standards. So the results from these screenings were output in these very old, very obscure data formats. And getting them out to the world was kind of a compound issue. It was, how do we even move this data from these highly classified ad hoc systems to the open internet, but also how do we put it in a format that people can actually use for their operations? So at the time I was on staff and I was part of the J3, and we were working on documentation for Title 10, Section 2274, which is the Title 10 authority to share data from the space catalog and from space operations with the rest of the world. And then in February of 2009, something crazy happened. We actually lost a active satellite, Iridium 33, hit Kosmos, which was a defunct Russian satellite, and they actually collided in space, and they both blew up and created thousands of pieces of debris. And even today, which is more than 10 years later, and I'm going to share my screen real quick. If you can see here, the green dots are the pieces of the Iridium satellite. The red dots are the piece of the Kosmos satellite. There's about 229 pieces of the Iridium satellite still left up there as debris. 879 pieces of the Kosmos satellite still up there. All those other white dots are active satellites. They're satellites that are up there, like the Starlink constellation, that are doing, doing day-to-day ops. So more than 10 years later, that collision and the pieces that were created from it are still posing a potent risk to the space environment, to operating in the space environment. So at the time, I was simply working on the staff and I had some technical experience. So leadership said, would you be willing to help us put together a system to do these screenings better and also get these screening results out to the rest of the world? There's a lot of panic right now among satellite operators and commercial operators, wondering if their satellite's going to be next. And so over the next 2 years, I created a pipeline from the old classified systems all the way to the open internet. At the time, Aerospace Corporation was running spacetrack.org. So I created a message format, which ended up being adopted as the official message format by CCSDS for doing conjunction notifications. And we got that out onto the website, and at the time, Space Track was simply feeding a bunch of these other old formats and now this new conjunction format. So I asked leadership. I said, if you think I'm up to it, would you let me take over spacetrack.org and modernize these other older formats like the two-line element set, the satellite catalog, reentry notifications, a few other messages, and uh, create a modern API that includes new formats like XML and JSON and CSV, so I can help get this out to the world. And they say, yep, no problem. So in 2011 into 2012, I created and launched the new version of spacetrack.org that's still being used right now. And we were able to successfully serialize those messages and get them out. And since then, there has been a great increase in especially commercial interest and seeing these services federated and put out in such a way that it's very easy to get to and is timely and it's reliable. In 2016, though, I started taking a look at some technical tasks based on some of the contracts that I was working on. And I said, the CCSDS standards are fine, but there is this whole new brand of large applications, big data, some of the nascent AI efforts then that need things that are going to be very, very efficient and very, very specific. Some of the older standards, including XML, it worked out really well at the time, but when you need to get very specific into what kind of data is in each of the variables, down to how many decimal places you need for a number. And you also need a very compact binary format so you can fit, 10 times the amount of data in the same amount of bandwidth. Those requirements started popping up. So I created a site called spacedatastandards.org. It's completely open source. And if you go there, there's a presentation that walks you through basically why it exists, how it works, what some of the data formats are, what some of the missions are that are needing these sorts of formats. And basically what this site does is it takes schemas that describe the data standards, which is what you have with other standards organizations like CCSDS. But it takes it one step farther and actually takes those definitions and then generates source code in all major programming languages and lets you download that source code for use in your applications. And what's neat is if you download the source code for, let's say, Java or C++ or JavaScript or TypeScript, if you use those from the same version, systems built with those can now all natively talk to each other without ever needing to get together and discuss exactly how to parse these messages. And so it really increases interoperability. And then 2 years ago, I got a grant from the Commerce Department for their new tracks system to continue developing the standards. And we're actually publishing a paper next quarter through NIST. And we are looking at, for the new track system, integrating these standards and the source code generator as one option for companies, for other nations, for even enthusiasts that have this kind of data that they need to transmit and receive as part of an open framework. So that's pretty much my journey up until now. So I'll pass it back to you, Nick.
No, this is amazing. Thanks for sharing all what happened in the last few years when it comes to also this and we're gonna have a demo today, so that's gonna be exciting because you're gonna show us a little bit more of the tool you just showed us a little bit when you showed us the some of the debris floating around in space after the collision, right? And so in fact, my next question to you, right? What did we learn from this collusion? What do you think, the United States has been doing to address what's going to be a growing problem?
That's a great question. One of the things we learned was that timely collaboration when it comes to owner operators is absolutely key. And what I mean by timely collaboration, for the Iridium constellation, for example, they do their maneuver planning 76 hours out and less. So even if you're doing a screening, a week in advance, which sounds like it'd be pretty good, especially if you have good ephemeris and a good orbital model. It might actually not be good enough because they might maneuver between then and the next maneuver. And being able to get their data and to accurately parse it and to understand what you're looking at and make sure that you're calling an object the same thing that they're calling it, it is a really big deal. Right now, I don't want to poke anybody, but there are a lot of commercial companies out there that are publishing matrices of basically what they call their satellites and what Space Force is calling their satellites. And there are also third parties like ESA and JAXA that have their own catalogs and have their own numbering systems. And no one's really at fault there. Everyone has to call their satellites whatever they're going to call them. But unfortunately, at this point, we don't have great coordination between all those systems to make sure that we know which satellite we're actually talking about. And right now, Space Force does something called cross-tag resolution, which is if they have two objects that they're tracking and they cross-tag them, they call one the other one's name and vice versa. Then when they put that data out there, operators of websites like Celestrak will actually report back to them and say, hey, I think you have these two objects mixed up. Sometimes the owner operators reach out and say, hey, I think these are mixed up. And transparency in that process, just so you understand which objects you're actually talking about, is a huge deal. And it's one of those things where when the satellite catalog was very small, here I'll present this real quick. Back before 1980, there were less than 5,000 objects that were even being tracked, and the number of payloads was in the triple digits. And now we're seeing north of 25,000 objects. In reality, it's about 10 times that in terms of all the different objects we're tracking down to 3 centimeters or so. And so what was a fairly simple problem, which is, satellite 3 is actually satellite 5. Now you're talking about hundreds of thousands of objects all moving very fast and all in different orbit regimes, and being able to collaborate in a way that everybody can have input, everybody can validate input, is very tricky. It's not a solved problem at all. It's something that we are constantly trying to improve. As far as the data formats go, knowing what reference frame, and for those of you who are new to that term, a reference frame is basically saying in whose measurements are you using. Like if I'm sitting here at my desk, my reference frame, this monitor is about 2 feet away from me, but in the reference frame of Nick, the monitor is a lot farther away. And so there are a lot of different reference frames you can use. There are a lot of different ways to describe orbits. There are a lot of different ways to propagate an orbit, which you take the initial state of a satellite and you say where it's going to be in the future. Lots of different ways to do that. And none of them is the complete correct way that everyone agrees it should be done. And each way has its use. Each way is valid. So being able to know what you're talking about and exactly how to describe what you're talking about. And then the last part of that really, folks, to round out the big lessons in terms of timeliness is can you get all of this information? Can you share it in an operationally relevant time frame and know that the information was received and that it was processed and that whoever is supposed to be looking at it is actually looking at it? We had a problem when we were doing these screenings at the time where a lot of these screenings would quote unquote fall on the floor, where they would do a screening, but the data wouldn't get out to the people that needed to see it. And there really wasn't a way to verify receipt. And after the collision, we did set up a system that's still active right now, and they built on it, and they have a commercial integration cell. Space Force has right now, where representatives from these companies actually sit in with the government and have these conversations personally with them. So between the system where they verify receipt of the data and direct collaboration, I mean, definitely come a long way since 2009.
Yeah, that's a lot of lessons learned for sure. And when you look at the space deployment, like you show you the curve, right? It's pretty amazing to see that growth, right? What do you think is the current risk, and is it even well understood by the leadership, and how do we deal with the issue?
I think leadership understands what the issues are. I think that it's pretty self-evident when you are on an operations floor and you are asking a very specific question like how many potential collisions is this constellation going to have over the next week? Things like that. What's the next reentry that's going to happen? The problems are very well understood. The processes that are used to deal with these are still developing. And I'll give you a good example. Last year, I'm sorry, it was actually in 2021, so it's 2 years ago. There was re-entry of a Chinese rocket body. It was the CZ-5B rocket body. And it re-entered. It actually ended up re-entering right here in the Indian Ocean. And Space Force actually asked myself and Dr. T.S. Kelso, who's running Celestra, to put together a live data look for potential reentry locations for the object. And so what we did was we took the orbit, and you can see the yellow and the red lines. And basically what that is when it gets below a certain altitude, and we were looking here at below 150 kilometers, those are the opportunities for it to re-enter and go ballistic, where the force of atmospheric drag overcomes other forces, and then it re-enters. So as you can see, it actually did end up re-entering right in the middle of one of those big red lines, which was great. But at the time, one of the data sharing issues during this event, you'll see multiple tags: predicted reentry, and another predicted reentry, and actual reported entry. These were given out on spacetrack.org, and they were basically sending them out rapid fire. And it says predicted as of this time, predicted as of this time. And as you can see, they're pretty far away. And we had people in Lisbon, Portugal, worried that the object might hit there. We had people in Greece worried that it might hit Crete. And then we had people that were down here in Perth, who actually, if you go out on Twitter, you can still find some of the great imagery of the broken up pieces of this object that were passing over Perth. But they were worried it could hit there. And because this was a largish object, it could potentially cause a lot of damage. Now, fortunately, it did an uncontrolled reentry where nobody was. But disseminating that data and knowing where the data came from and what the timeliness of that data was remains a big challenge. During the event, spacetrack.org actually went down because so many people were going to the site to get this data because they were very concerned. This is something that could directly impact their lives. And so I helped set up a robust infrastructure with this helpful graphic that was using the same data that was being put out on the site. And we put it up on a server that could handle a lot of traffic using a robust decentralized infrastructure. And it didn't go down, and people were able to use it. And it was a win for some of the concepts that I've been working on, where we're able to use the newer data standards as well and make a very efficient web service that was able to help people.
Sorry, I'm muted. That's super impressive. What you just showed us again, right, is a prime example of the ability to track. But then, I guess, do you think AI could bring value in terms of like more accurately predicting reentry in this use case? I mean, obviously, you had different opportunities for reentry, and then it happened over the water, which was obviously better. And by the way, if it didn't happen over the water, do we have any capabilities to stop it from hitting the ground? Or is it just like good
Honestly,
luck with that?
honestly, we really don't, and even something like missile defense wouldn't work in this case because the object is breaking up as it's going through the
Right.
atmosphere. By the time it re-entered, it was hundreds of pieces. So it's a shotgun blast of stuff that's coming down. So really, by far, our best defense is early warning, knowledge of what's going on, and then doing preventative steps. So using AI, using machine learning are definitely two very big growth areas. They absolutely can help, and they have helped. There's a few pilots going on right now with a few FFRDCs, and there's also one internal to the Department of Commerce where they are using machine learning to basically take a look at the entire satellite catalog, history of reentries, drag profiles of the objects, and the orbits of the objects, and basically say, okay, given all of this data, can we predict where any piece that's up there, where it will re-enter, how it will re-enter, what are the breakup profiles? So yes, absolutely, the modeling is being done. We in Digital Arsenal are actually taking it a step further with our new platform, where we're actually trying to get those models and that data into the hands of everyone on the internet using our new platform. Well, we are taking those models and then converting them to WebAssembly and trying to run them in the browser so everybody has their own miniature, space situational awareness, common operational picture, which they can then ask these questions of. What other satellites have a reentry profile similar to the ones that I'm looking at? What are the next few that can reenter given their current profiles? Things like that. So, yeah, absolutely. And I think both AI and ML are going to be huge growth areas in the next 10 to 20 years in terms of investment, but also in terms of being able to trust those models as they're trained more and more to give us a better idea, especially when mission planning. What orbits should I send these into? At what point, past max Q, am I going to be concerned with something breaking up and re-entering? And one of the great things, by the way, is that one of the problems that we used to have with this approach is lack of data. Right? There really wasn't that much going on. But in the past 10 years, if you guys have seen, we've had exponential growth in terms of sending up these mega constellations. And so just from incidents like the Starlink failed launch, where they lost 43 satellites due to solar weather and not planning for that, we now have a lot of data to feed into AI/ML processes, and the more that's launched, the better data we get. So it's definitely an iterative process, definitely something that's going to be a big player.
Yeah, interesting. So, you mentioned the importance of communication, right, between the nations with a collision use case. But what's going to be the situation when we're facing Russia, China doing launches, and obviously very poor communication with the U.S. right now. So is it going to be like a coordination problem across nations, or what's the vision if we can't effectively communicate?
Well, if we can't effectively communicate, I'll say that the situation is pretty dire. It doesn't look so great. However, I am actually working on a system to help people communicate. It's called the Space Data Network. It's going to be something that anyone can join. I actually have a quick presentation here. You can actually see the decentralized nodes that are currently active in the network. I've got 199 peers up right now, and all of these are running software that is able to basically punch through any firewall. It's able to get around the world in seconds, very robust, decentralized. And it's the same technology. It's using the interplanetary file system, same technology that's used for NFTs. It is something that's going to run using the standards on spacedatastandards.org. And anybody, without anyone's permission, can spin up a node, can provide their Ethereum key, can say, this is my identity, here's some data I want to share, and anybody else can establish trust with that node and trust anybody's data that they want and get it out there without needing to go through any sort of formal process, without needing to give up their real identity. So I think things like this and technologies like this that allow people to anonymously or pseudo-anonymously share data in ways that can't easily be stopped technically really is the way forward in a contested environment. If you look here, I'm actually going to so everyone at home can see kind of what the maybe scale of the problem is. I just put up the U.S. satellites, the Chinese satellites, and the Russian satellites. These are all just the active payloads, not the space junk. And let's see, share this. So the green is the U.S. satellites, the red are the Chinese satellites, and the light purple are the Russian payloads. So as you can see, we're all operating in the same orbit regimes. We're all operating right next to each other. And when you have objects that are very close to each other, we have CENTCOM 3 here. We've got UMAL 202 here, and we have ChinaSat 19 here. These objects. Let's see. Change the reference frame, might be a little bit easier to see. Right. So these objects are, operating pretty close to each other.
Yeah.
And so if you're a satellite operator and you're saying, hey, I have, ChinaSat is operating right next to UMAL 202, and you can see, their proximity, you're going to want to have a way that regardless of what's going on politically, you can put your data out there and people can get it and use it effectively, because regardless of what's going on politically, regardless of what's going on militarily, we need to be able to operate safely in space, because if something bad happens up there that prevents that from happening, it affects everybody. And it doesn't really matter what your politics are or who your friends or foes are today. If suddenly an entire orbit regime is made unusable, especially by an accident, but if there's a bad actor or somebody doing something, it's best to know as soon as possible. Here's actually a really good example of the Xi'an 12 right here. As its predicted orbit actually goes by all of these other satellites as it's wandering through the geostationary belt. So if they were to do a maneuver, it's possible that they could end up hitting some of these other satellites, which is a really dangerous thing if it's done uncoordinated. So it's definitely in the best interests of everybody to say, hey, I have a satellite that's coming your way. Make sure that it is not going to hit any of the other satellites. So you see here, we're gonna have a close approach where it gets fairly close to CENTCOM 3. And this is just one incident let's take a look at the time here on the 21st, where it's going to get kind of close. So for the owner operators to put information out there saying, hey, I'm going to be maneuvering at this date, update the ephemeris that you are operating on accordingly. That's incredibly important. Being able to coordinate that is incredibly important. So
Just to be clear, there is no centralized site across nations that is used today to share that information. That's a
no,
goal, right?
it is. It is. It
Right.
is. Yeah. There's no real clearinghouse. And part of the reason why Trax is being stood up at Department of Commerce is to take some of the burden off of the Department of Defense for doing this sort of traffic management. And that's really what Trax stands for, is traffic management system. Because, the Department of Defense's goal is to defend the United States' ability to operate freely in that domain from a defense perspective. Whereas everyone else that's dealing with them, a lot of times it is other nations' militaries based on who deploys and operates these capabilities. It becomes very difficult because there's lots of reasons that they can't talk to other owner operators or other nations. So trying to move some of that responsibility from the DoD out into the Department of Commerce to more of the open world, to more of the commercial side, to say, okay, we're going to try to build a system that that we're allowed to talk to everybody. We're allowed to take everybody's data. We want to be able to do this from it's kind of like an FAA for space. You wouldn't want the 15th Fighter Wing being the ones that are responsible for doing traffic deconfliction around Dulles, right? You're going to want a civil agency, someone whose first goal is that safety. And that's really what they're trying to do with the Department of Commerce, which is it's great. It's a great effort, and I think we're going to get pretty far in doing that in the next few years.
Interesting. So, when you look at the amount of data you're talking about here, right? Obviously, you're talking about also the number of visits during an event and the server having to, be able to take that load. But that's the easy part, I guess. What do you think of the data volume and the analysis problem? I mean, we mentioned AI. Obviously, do you feel like the future is going to have to really rely on AI to be able to handle that kind of scale?
I think that in terms of what technologies will need to be relied on, it will definitely be the techniques that are being used with AI/ML that are going to be absolutely necessary in handling that volume of data. In terms of the specific technologies used, I think pretty much every technology that's being explored right now, from large language models to low-level convolutional data techniques, finite state machines, things like that, can be adapted to analyze this data. What's nice is that just about all of this data is already numeric. So there isn't that issue that you have with, for example, like large language models where you have to vectorize human speech first and figure out what numbers are associated with which words. So in terms of the absolute volume, yes, it will absolutely have to be automated. You'll absolutely need AI/ML in the future to be able to deal with just the volume of data that you need to analyze. But it's not just in the volume of data that needs to be analyzed, actually in the volume of results. Right now, about 45,000 conjunction notification messages go out every day, and the number is just going up. So how many of those are really important? How many of those are results that we should care about? Why? Being able to do analysis on the results that are the result of these number crunching processes is another area where AI/ML is definitely going to shine, because right now it's usually people in front of a terminal with this gigantic mass of data trying to write these scripts to figure out exactly how to manage it. And being able to develop models that can take a look at a large generated data set as a result and then find things that are important, and then back test that in the future to say, hey, were we right? Was it really that important? Was this an incident? If an incident happens, is this an incident we could have caught? And being able to do that rolling analysis is, it's going to be very, very important.
That makes total sense. I guess I always go back to disasters, right, and technology, but we talk about AI/ML. What else do you feel like is needed, right, to be able to really help prevent disasters? Can we really rely on the detection thing that effectively can stop it? If something starts to reach back, down to earth, and we can't catch it, and all the at least minimize the debris, isn't that going to be a massive issue because it's bound to happen statistically? So
Mm-hmm.
what else could be done on the technology side, right, to prevent the actual disasters, not just
Sure.
heating and collisions, but also back on the ground?
Well, there's a bunch of neat things that are happening both in space and on the ground. I'll talk about some of the in space ones. There's companies like Astroscale that are actually pioneering techniques to remove space junk from orbit. And so they go up there and they go right next to pieces of space junk. They're traveling 17,000 miles per second and grab them and deorbit them. And so cleaning up the space environment manually is something that we can absolutely do. And so that's one of the new technologies that a lot of different companies and a lot of different governments are looking at. Also, including with rocket bodies and other pieces of launch debris that aren't meant to be in orbit. Having standards for making sure that those do not reach orbit or are deorbited in a orderly way. That is something that the U.S. has put in policy within the past 20 years. Other countries such as China that do not have as advanced a space launch program are still trying to get up to that standard. Which is one of the reasons we had the controlled reentry event that was kind of a problem. So making sure that we have those standards and we have technologies available to as many operators as possible so that they can do these safe space launches. As far as things on the ground, once something's gone ballistic, there's not a whole lot to do other than just get out of its way. Making sure that we have safety procedures in place so that people know what to do in case of a rogue reentry is very important. I'm reminded here of the Phobos grunt reentry, which was in 2011, where the Russian Mars lander was supposed to land on the Phobos moon of Mars. Had quite a lot of hydrazine fuel, which is great for getting you to Mars, but it's really bad for people. 1 part per million can kill you. And so it was going to re-enter, and we were trying to figure out where it was going to re-enter. Fortunately, it re-entered in the Pacific Ocean. But for a while there, we thought it might actually re-enter near Tokyo, Japan, which is the world's largest city. And so there really weren't any procedures, and people in the State Department were talking to the people in the Japanese government, trying to figure out at what point should they issue an evacuation order, where should they evacuate from, what was the profile. All of these things really should have been figured out before this vehicle was with the capacity to cause this problem was launched, which is this thing doesn't make it out of Earth's orbit, out of our sphere of influence, what happens when it starts to re-enter? At what point do we worry? At what point do we evacuate? None of those procedures were set up. That there really wasn't anything other than here's hoping it doesn't hit near a populated place. So those are just a few things I think that are points that should be considered in the very near future as we launch more and more things.
So, we talked about, we've seen your product and it's pretty amazing what you've built. Obviously adding AI and complex capabilities and streamlining access and making, the data formats widely usable, which, it wasn't until you started fixing it. The format looks like, back in the day when you had to really follow very specific, um, set of things in terms of like sizing and all that nightmare. It's very difficult, right, for people to ingest it, but also pretty harder to generate it as well. So I'd love for you to give us a quick demo here. You showed us, some already pretty exciting things you could see. What else could you show us here?
Sure. Let's see. Uh, we
And maybe
have
tell a little bit about the technology background and what is it built in, and how long
absolutely.
it's been for you to make this over many years, I'm sure, and get it to where it is. So always good to get a little bit of a background here.
Absolutely. So I used to work for a company called Analytical Graphics, and in 2011, I saw an engineering build of a new product that they have called Cesium. If you go to cesium.com, you can actually check it out. It's an open source 3D globe that is absolutely amazing. You can use it to display everything from 3D tiles to KML paths for airplanes, trucks, whatever you need. It's a great geospatial tool. In about 2016, 2017, with the number of space objects going up exponentially, I realized that the underlying performance of the globe really wasn't built for that amount of objects. And so uh, we did some development, some research, and we created a version of Cesium that we're calling Orb Pro. And we can post a link up later. But if you go to digitalarsenal.io, there's going to be some information about it there. And basically, what you can do with Orb Pro is load the entire satellite catalog, do client-side filtering of space objects, so you can set up queries. You can plug it into AI engines to have the AI engines answer questions about the satellite catalog and then send the results to the globe. You can do things like calculate when something on the ground is visible to something in space, and also when objects in space can see each other. We're working on conjunction assessment to actually get you the results for when objects are close to each other and when things should maneuver. The engine inside this is actually running a version of the astrodynamics engine that is used by Space Force. And we can give all the orbital information for an object, including its altitude, velocity, eccentricity of its orbit, everything that's in the Keplerian element sets, plus the position, location, as well as its relative position to things on the ground. So we're taking all of that, plus the tech that I showed you earlier in terms of predicting where it might re-enter. And we're also rolling in some launch analysis engine to figure out if a object is launching, what objects it might hit on the way up. And so we can do threat analysis there. And all of this is run inside your browser without any desktop tools, doesn't need any plugins, and it honestly doesn't need anything except for a file server to pass it the initial satellite catalog files. And you can also create shareable links when you create scenarios, and you can share those links with other people. And it's meant to be a ground truth, common operational picture that can run offline decentralized and allow multiple users to share the same view of the data so that they can do analysis. It also has a plugin system that we're working on that allows you to do some of the things I mentioned. Let's see.
So just a question, do you feel like companies like SpaceX, what do they use to track? They have their own stuff and they build it from scratch, or would they partner with you to try to also get a better insight on collisions and stuff? Or what do you think companies are doing today to measure that risk?
Well, right now, most companies actually rely on the U.S. government to send them conjunction notifications. A lot of them do analysis, and there are other commercial products that allow people to submit data and receive analytic results. What we're trying to do that's different from them is allow people to do this analysis themselves in their browser with the data that they want to use, because as we've mentioned before, a lot of people are reticent to give out their data for fear
Hmm.
of losing either competitive advantage or for national security reasons. So we're trying to decentralize and federate this as much as possible. So like
When it comes to predicting, the over time, how far ahead can you go? Like if I want to see like 5 years from, I mean, obviously with the current satellites, we can project new launches, but when it comes to the existing path,
Mhm.
is there an ability to project like a year from now, or is it like just a few hours, or what are we talking about?
That's a very good question. So it all depends on the orbit regime. When you're lower in the atmosphere, you actually uh, are subject to more drag forces from the atmosphere itself.
Yeah.
And so for objects that are, I can actually show you. Um, if you take a look here, objects that are closer to the Earth, if I change the scale to a year and drag it out, you'll notice two things. One, the orbits for the objects that are closer to the Earth start getting very erratic, and the orbit, like the one I just selected, starts becoming really big and weird and loopy. That's because the propagator that's being used under the covers really doesn't know how to model the space environment that far out, because the atmosphere changes a lot. You get certain areas of the globe that are hotter or colder. It expands and contracts. It's more of a day-to-day type of thing. So if you have a low flyer, really 3-4 days out is pretty much the most that you can use in terms of the data. For things that are in the geostationary belt, that are all the way out here, 30,000 kilometers and above, you can actually notice how some of the objects start clustering around points the farther out you go. And that's because due to the way that the physics works out, if these satellites don't maneuver, they will actually start clustering at these points, which is kind of a neat way to verify that this is working correctly. If you have something in this orbit regime, you can trust the ephemeris, for months out roughly, and you're gonna have a lot of argument about that. But if the object's not maneuvering, not actively maneuvering, you get I'm gonna say weeks of good ephemeris out at that level. So and then of course different orbit regimes depending on where the perigee is and how close to the atmosphere they are, and a few other factors determines how accurate everything else is in. But if you get a catalog with an epoch of today and everything has been observed within the past day, you got about 3 or 4 days before the data gets bad enough that you really can't work with it anymore.
So do you think all the satellites are maneuverable, or are there some satellite that just can't maneuver?
Actually, that's a really good question. When you're filtering the satellite catalog here, for example, you have object type, and one of the things that feeds into an object type, whether or not the object itself is able to maneuver anymore, because it might have been able to maneuver before, but now the status says that it's dead or it's inactive. And keeping an accurate satellite catalog up that accurately describes each of the classes, and also what objects belong to that class, is actually is one of the big problems right now. If you have a conjunction between two objects and you think the other object can maneuver, but it actually can't, it's definitely going to have an effect on your decision-making process. So in terms of objects that can maneuver versus can't versus partial, yeah, that's something that a lot of people are working on right now to make sure that there's an accurate, maintained satellite catalog with that information.
Could you show us? Is that a thing to show us all the objects that are not are they just debris or just not active anymore?
Sure.
I mean, it's just like junk, effectively. And then, what's interesting also is, as a pilot, we learn that if we see a plane coming towards us, we turn to the right, right? And so they will turn to the
Right.
right, we turn to the right, no one is gonna, converge. Is there rules like that when it comes to like,
Turn.
hey,
Sorry,
which
turn to the
direction
right.
are you gonna turn? If you all
Uh,
turn in the same direction, it's a problem, right?
right. Exactly. Yeah. No, and the right. So pretty much everything you're looking at here is right. So
Okay.
we'll make two different groups real quick if you'll bear with me. So the first group, we're going to have operational payloads. The second group is everything else. I'm going to go ahead and color the payloads green, and everything else is junk. So that's right there is about your proportion to things that are operational versus things that are not.
Actually, can you put the dead stuff green? We see green better on the screen, so
Oh yeah, sure.
yeah, it just doesn't show as well. Sorry.
No problem.
Just green pops out.
Yes, it does. So
You can't
yeah,
just
I'll change.
swap
All
the other one maybe to gray
yeah,
or whatever, or
sure.
red, or maybe blue. I don't know, whatever shows up.
See if red will show up. All right. All right. There. Is that better?
So that's the junk now is green, right?
Yeah. Junk is green, and all of the active satellites are red. So.
So when they are junk and they are so far, not the close ones to the orbit, but the one that are, like 30,000 kilometer away, are they gonna
Yeah.
slowly, go further away, or are they gonna keep staying there? Like you see some, you see some here, right? So
Sure.
um,
Well, it all depends. Depends on a lot of different factors. If you're sending satellites away, it's called in a super synchronous orbit, which is one of the ways to get rid of old or
right, you
dead
just push
satellites.
them
Yeah.
before they die, right?
So it's yeah, if you're past 35,000 kilometers, which is kind of 35,000 kilometers, roughly what you're at here, then your orbit often tends to degrade, and you can get farther and farther away depending on how much energy you had in your original orbit.
Right.
But if you're within this belt and you can't maneuver, and you don't have enough energy to escape, then you'll pretty much stick around here, forever. And as a matter of fact, there's a Dr. Kessler worked for NASA in the late 70s, actually coined a syndrome they now call Kessler syndrome, which is it's called an ablation cascade. Basically, if things in geo, because their relative motion to each other and the fact that they're kept in this orbit by the physics, if one of them hits another one and that other one, the pieces from it hit two more, and it keeps going and keeps going, you could actually cause a cascade that would take out everything in that orbit, and there really isn't a whole lot that can be done to stop it once the cascade starts. And it's something that people weren't that worried about until the Iridium Kosmos collision, and then a lot of people started asking, oh crap, is this really possible? Is this, do we really need to make sure that nothing hits up there? Should we be tracking all the junk up there to see if there's junk on junk collisions, and maybe launch a mission to knock some of it out into super synchronous orbit? Or, there's a lot of questions being asked because of how unusable it make this very valuable orbit.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah, it's a big deal.
So let's go back for a second to your data formats.
Sure.
Obviously, the current ones are very old. You started modernizing them, right? And what's the vision? Would it be to be, agile and iterative, or another set of 40? I know, like, when we did the nuclear upgrade, with GBSD, the last nukes lasted for 70 years. We're gonna go another 70 years. So it's not gonna be like, agile is gonna be like, okay, we're gonna have it stuck in time another 70 years. Do you feel like for data formats nowadays, it's just better? I mean, you want stability, you want,
Mhm.
flexibility, but you also want something usable that's going to keep up with time. So are we going to have a next 40 years again, and that's going to be the new standard, or what do you think is a vision?
So I think hopefully, starting with space data standards, we're going to see a move away from fixed formats to standards and then implementation. A format is basically how you order the bits that go on the computer. So a format would be like a comma separated value file, CSV file, which are ubiquitous in AI, or something like JavaScript object notation. But if you think about it, if you're just if you use Microsoft Office, you save it in a docx format. The standard is what goes in that format. So it's the actual content that goes in there. The content is probably not going to change that much. Content is going to be pretty standard and something that's going to last a very long time. The physics behind all this is very well understood. They're probably not going to come out with any new data fields that need to be added. The formats, though, change blisteringly fast, and if you're in the technology world, how fast things can come in and out of fashion. And what was like XML was all the rage 20 years ago, and now almost nobody uses it. So the idea of separating the standard, what goes in the format, from the format itself, which can change, is at the heart of what I'm trying to do with space data standards, which I also think is in the heart of every effort going forward to be able to separate those things out. The current problem with the CCSDS text standards is that they only approve something called key value notation, KVN, which is very old, and XML, which is incredibly verbose and also old. Neither of those formats are really used outside of the CCSDS standards themselves. Most modern computing systems don't use those. So being able to take the goodness that is the content from those current CCSDS standards and then move them into formats that are modern is, I think, the way we modernize and to make sure that these things remain viable year to year and to really stay on top of how those formats are changing and making sure that it's available in old and new formats. Because you're right, you do want some continuity. You don't want to have these systems needing to be, most space situational awareness systems, especially in the government, aren't 6-week startups where you can generate a new code base and just get going. These are things that are big iron and have been around for a while and need to be reliable and dependable. So you want to make sure that the formats those are using are accounted for and can be used, while also giving the newer systems the ability to innovate and use newer formats that are easier to work with in newer systems. So I think that separation is key.
Sorry, I was muted again. Now that's exactly right, right? And I think, the flexibility this is going to bring to the table is going to be probably the difference between wide adoption and just, snowflakes, right? So,
No,
you
absolutely,
know, I
absolutely.
go back to open tools, right? Because I think, it's so essential to, like you said, having that open community, right? So people feel like they can adopt these formats, right? So do
Mm-hmm.
you feel like, you know, open source engagement is the answer here? And is there also like any engagement to pause some of these legacy formats and also the new ones? What's the vision on both generation, pausing, and then the open source community engagement there?
Yeah. So right now, on Space Data Standards, we actually have the legacy messages. Some of the legacy messages, definitely not all of them. And I'll give you an example. You take a look at something called the vector covariance message. This is a very long document describing this very old format. And this is actually what it looks like when it comes out of the computer. It's done in an older format called JANAP 128, which stands for Joint Army Navy Air Force Protocol. That was pre-internet, and actually, if you go to the site and click on the link here, you can see. I'll bring it up. It was actually a PDF of the format description. So this is from the Joint Chiefs of Staff in March 1983. It's for the AutoDIN network, and as you can imagine, it's quite out of date. And yet, right now, this is the second most accurate way to describe orbital information from U.S. government systems, and is being actively used in operations. So I am working on a parser for this format, and I am working on building an open source pipeline that can utilize anyone's plug and play AI/ML tools to analyze documents like this and to give answers about what reasonable updates we can make to the actual formats. And so, I'm leading these efforts. Again, because this is open source and because this is all up on GitHub right now, anyone can go to spacedatastandards.org, click on GitHub, go to this site, and Digital Arsenal, spacedatastandards.org on GitHub, and submit an issue, give me a pull request, make a request for another data type that needs to be parsed or modernized, and we can all work on this together to make sure that everybody's needs get met. So as far as other efforts, I am honestly not aware of any other efforts right now. But if anybody out there is, please put them in contact with me, because this is something that I'm trying to work with as many people as possible on.
So, looking now at what's next, right? People obviously see the growth, see the commercial industry booming, see now the new fancy space force with the Guardians, right? A lot of exciting things happening, but you also see smaller nations getting a foothold in space industry. You see a lot of commercial applications. So you talk about debris retrieval, but also like there's refueling in space. Some people start talking about having a base in space. We're talking about going to Mars, going to the moon again. What do you think is going to be the next big thing?
The next big step in terms of data sharing, or in terms of space
More like
innovation, or
the next big thing, in not steps thing, but just like in terms of like what else is coming from
oh,
industry. What is going to be the next
the
disruptor,
next big wave.
right?
I think the next big wave, and this is just me spitballing here, is going to be commercial space flight. I think, in the book, or the short story, Man in the High Castle, where there was an alternate version of World War II, and afterwards the Axis powers had won, they were talking about using rocket ships to go from Paris to Tokyo in like 90 minutes, which you can actually do because of the Great Circle routes, and if you go orbital, you can actually do that. Commercial space flight, both for tourism but also for moving things in bulk, is going to be very, very big. There's going to be economies of scale that can be realized there that are just not possible using terrestrial means. as a corollary to that, I think institutionally, one of the next big areas, and it's already big, but it's going to be really big, is insurance and risk management for space assets, especially when they're carrying people. Um, if you have a human space flight where you're taking a suborbital flight from here to there, you're really going to need to know where the other objects are, and you want to be able to do those conjunction assessment, collision avoidance, and given the tempo and frequency of these flights, it's going to have to be a process that is incredibly streamlined, very accurate. Right now, like the Starship launch, was pushed 2 days because there's a freezing problem, I think, feeding the first stage. And we see that now, and that really is akin to having your Model T and needing to recrank it, and that now you can just get in a Tesla these days and just go. You don't need to crank anything. Getting from here, where we are with current commercial space flight, and where we're going to be even 5-10 years, where you go from we got to delay it from 2 days because of a frozen valve to we've already solved all those problems, get in and go. And we're going to be going every half hour, and we're going to keep going, and making sure that those remain safe, and making sure that the insurance policies are able to have the carrot of liability control with the stick of insurance cost. Basically, are you even going to be an insurable operation? If you have if you had an airline that really couldn't tell you how close it was going to get to other planes around major airports, or didn't have a really good process for that, would they even be insurable? Would they even be commercially viable? All these questions are going to be answered quickly, and dare I say violently, in the next few years. And the commercialization of space and being able to apply what we currently do to that domain, it's going to be eye-opening, it's going to be scary, and hopefully through some of these efforts is going to be a little more controlled than it could be. But it's going to be very exciting, and honestly, I can't wait to take my first commercial space flight. It's something I've looked forward to my entire life, and hopefully that's something I'll be able to see affordably in the next 10 years. So I think that's the next big thing.
Yeah, no, spot on. It's interesting, right? Because just a few weeks ago, Virgin, I don't think I forgot if it's Galactic or the other one, but there's two, but they
Virgin Galactic,
pretty much, yeah, pretty much went downhill. So space is complex, right? But at the same time, we see some companies like SpaceX and others, Orbit Fab and many others thriving. So what do you think is going to be kind of the sweet spot for companies, right? If you were to create a new space companies tomorrow, obviously, building an entire ecosystem is so complex. I have friends that left SpaceX. They were running their DevSecOps software teams, and then they realized, wait a minute, I'm now in a new company and I only have like 5 people for software, and I used to have 200 just to do my DevSecOps stuff at SpaceX. So like they don't know how to scale and how to embrace software innovation, and there's kind of two thoughts in space, right? There's people
Yeah.
focusing on the hardware side and people focusing on software innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Which one would you focus on?
Focus on in terms of.
I mean, if you are a new entrepreneur and you want to get started in space, and you want to go after the market in an easier way, but yet still make profit and thrive. There's so many opportunities. People don't even know where to begin. So
Yeah. Well, I mean,
get excited.
sure. It all depends on what area you're coming at it. As Elon Musk said, I think he said it was 400 watt hours per kilogram is where things get really interesting. Getting the energy density required to do some of these things affordably, reliably, I think is where things are exciting. So if you're really into physics, if you're into chemistry, if you are into mechanical engineering, the thing to be driving at right now is how do we increase the power to weight ratio, period. Whether it's making lighter components, remove, reduce, recycle, or making more powerful means of storage and quicker means of conveyance of stored energy from one place to another. That's going to be huge. Whoever cracks that energy density problem is going to basically dictate how the next few years are going to go. Beyond that, in terms of information systems, if you're doing things like what I'm doing, being able to look at AIML and the new tools as they come online, and trying to frame problems in the way that those tools can solve those problems is huge. The reference frame shift, I'm sure everyone's talking about Sage AI, and ChatGPT and all these large language models and things like that, and they're really fun to play with. But really, with those, when you get down to it, technically, they're just the next word, guessing what the next word is going to be based on a large corpus, which is great. These kinds of problems are predictive. You need to know where something's going to be well into the future. Predictive problems are really, really, really hard. And they're hard because trying to find models of how to predict anything into the future, whether it is for healthcare, whether it is for outer space physics, or whether it is for the stock market. If you figure that out, by the way, let me know. So, just drive me a DM. But doing those kind of predictive things and taking technology that's meant to be backward looking and then making it forward looking, even in a small way, is incredibly powerful and will be incredibly useful. And if you are studying linear algebra, finite state machines, all of the low-level knowledge you need to understand how these things work, and coming up with those predictive systems, definitely a massive growth area. I'll say another one, and this is a little bit easier in terms of who can get started and how you can do it, but doing outreach for orbital safety, going to conferences, talking with people, the human factor when it comes to space, and telling them why it's important for them to engage with other people for orbital safety, what's in it for them, and making sure that the human connective tissue is taken care of. We definitely need more of that. We need more ambassadors. We need more people that are willing to talk about the benefits of working together and the risks of not working together. There's actually not as much of that as you would think. Most people are very happy to go to these space conferences, talk about their technical achievements or the product that they want to sell. But sitting down with the people that are involved and say, hey, you guys are doing good things. Listen, I know it might not seem like it's immediately profitable, but can we talk to you about contributing, 0.5% of your time to these open source standards projects? Can we get you engaged? I remember when I was active duty Air Force, a bunch of PhDs were doing a connectivity test for the satellite control network. And they came to my squadron. I was a young captain, and I was talking technical stuff. And they said, we're going to use some CCSDS formats. And I was like, oh, that's great. What is that? And they're like, oh, it's a consultative committee for space data systems. They're having a meeting. Do you want to go? And that's all I knew. So I was after a mid shift, and I was still wearing my flight suit, and showed up at the Broadmoor there in Colorado Springs, walked into a meeting room with a bunch of big brains everywhere. I was 26, and the entire meeting stops. They all turn around and look at me, and the guy who was leading it says, oh, are you guys finally going to come and play with us? And I'm like, okay, I'm not guys. I'm not representing the government here. I told my doctor so-and-so to come by and check this out. I'm here just to listen. I shouldn't have worn my flight suit. My bad. It was kind of embarrassing, but the lack of coordination and outreach, and it wasn't because the government, was being malicious about it, or it was an exclusionatory thing. It was because people just hadn't had those kinds of connections. These people that were doing the integration tests talked with all the colonels and generals and all the people that were important that were doing this, but they didn't offhand invite them to go see these standards meetings. And I had great conversations that week, and I've continued to have great conversations. So that kind of outreach, very important. If you find yourself in the industry, or you find that you are talented doing person-to-person stuff, and you have an interest in outer space safety, then I highly encourage you to get involved and to apply for non-technical outreach positions with companies that are interested in doing the right thing, and in keeping space safe and sustainable, and with the government as well. And apply for jobs in those sectors so that you can work on that kind of outreach.
Yeah, awesome. So obviously, I got to ask you the question, right? Because
Yeah.
that wouldn't be fair if I don't ask you this. But how do you see technology like GPT specifically, right, augment the capabilities we talked about today?
So we're actually working on a pilot right now with Databricks using their Dolly
Dolly too, yeah.
the version 2. We actually just spun up a cluster of
Dolly V2, yeah.
AWS GPU instances on Friday, and we are working on a pipeline specifically to work with that capability, where we can ask it questions like, show me all Chinese satellites that have been launched since last week, and it will take that natural language and turn it into a scenario that you can view, that you can manipulate, that you can do analysis with, and come back with actual answers. And this kind of our first foray into integrating this AI capability into what we're doing. And as we build more and more analytic models, we're looking at more ways we can connect those analytic models with the natural language processing capabilities of things like Ask Sage. And then be able to do some of the policy processing that Ask Sage can do, to look at policy and say, okay, based on this policy, show me everything that's going to be affected if this policy changes. And then once we get that working, then the question is, show me how to change policy based on what we're seeing now. When I worked on writing the SSA sharing program, Title 10, Section 2274, General Cressy was working on it in the Air Force, and we were all working underneath to get him so we could sign that and get it in front of Congress. It was very eye-opening, because the amount of packages we had to staff through Stratcom, we had to look at non-VOD, NASA, civil space documentation through our OSC group. There were a lot of factors that went into writing that document. And if we would have had something like Ask Sage, where we could just go through and say, hey, show me all policy that affects objects in the geo orbit regime. Hey, show me all policy that affects failed launches, that affects reentries, that affects objects that are within 5 kilometers of each other in a repeating basis, to understand how the interplay of policy and data work, and then use a capability like ours to not only visualize it, but to change some of the operating parameters and say, show me how this affects policy. To have that kind of loop, one, it would have saved us a lot of time. But two, I think the version of policy that can be created with that is so many orders of magnitude more powerful and capable and survivable than what we're able to do now. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about Ask Sage is everyone complains about the government being non-responsive, or, man, the government can't do anything right. It's such a bureaucracy. It's such a machine. Well, when you're able to grease the wheels of that machine with AI and speed things up to the point of creating a feedback loop that now works in seconds instead of days or weeks or months, you are now accelerating the speed at which the government can act. And the very sharp, very intelligent people that are in the government and control these processes now have the mechanisms, I would say almost for the first time, to quickly enact policy, quickly study policy, get within their OODA loop, to be able to say, well, this didn't work, that didn't work. We're able to do a war game with this policy. We wrote the policy this morning. We stuck it into Ask Sage and OrPro, and by this afternoon, you know what? This is why it won't work. We don't have to wait 6 months for an FFRDC to give us a study. We can see right here, if we have this policy and these things happen, this is the result. And it doesn't say if the result's good or bad. That's for the people to decide, but it can get you that result very, very, very quickly. So I don't know, I'm excited about this. I absolutely see the necessity for it. And like you mentioned earlier, with the amount of things that are going to be launched, this is going to be required. This is going to be mandatory. There will not be, people are not going to trust policies that were not AI enhanced, because there's no way that people can grasp the amount of data and the amount of processing required to make sensible decisions about things like this.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And let's be clear, I did not pay you to say this.
No,
In any way,
he's
shape,
not
or
paying
form.
me to say this at all. Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, it was really our conversation about me contacting him about Ask Sage is how he invited me to be on the
That's
pod.
right.
So,
when I saw your demo, I was like, we have to come to the show and show people what you're
absolutely,
doing.
absolutely,
So, and by the way, Dolly V2, we're bringing it with that. So I partnered with Amazon to bring it to the secret and top secret fabric. So that's going to be great. We're going to have it on Sage, and OpenAI is not going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately, at this time. Let's not lie. Dolly is probably 10 to 20 times less exciting as OpenAI GPT 3.5 4 models. It's just not as good, but it's the next best thing, and we want to bring it on the high side. It's better than nothing, and so certainly that's going to be a great option for people to leverage on the high side. We're also going to have Cohere, same concept, not as good. It's almost like when you play with GPT-4 and you go you go back to Dolly, it's like going from a genius PhD to a 4-year-old. So it's a little bit frustrating, particularly when you're like me and you spend your day on GPT and you make it do crazy stuff. I mean, yesterday again, I wrote someone reached out to me from an office. I'm not going to say whom, but they're doing this bid RFP, where they think GPT will bring ton of value. And I agree, but they have this trade wins RFP. You have to go and write some 2-page paper, whatever. I'm like, we're getting 30 to 60 leads a day. I don't have time to freaking write an RFP answer. And then my brain kicked in. I was like, oh wait, I have Sage, right? So I could do that. And so in 47 minutes we wrote the 2-page paper and I used GPT-4 32K tokens to copy and paste the whole bid, and then add a little paragraph about us and what we do and the value we bring in this use case, and you just wrote the stuff, and I pretty much copy and pasted it, so
yeah, well,
it's pretty amazing.
It might be for the same one. We're actually doing the same thing with trade wins. It was for decentralized PKI.
No, that's not it. That's
So
the stuff we bid is the software assurance stuff. So
okay.
different stuff, but always
Yeah.
happy to partner, obviously. But I'm very impressed with the product you built, obviously. I think people that that's why for the first time, in fact, in the history of the show, we've done a demo, because I felt like showing it is the only way to do it justice. And it's also kind
really
of mind-boggling seeing all the dots, seeing all the people, probably 99% of the people don't realize the volume of space objects we're talking about. Right. And I almost wanted to see you on Fox and demo this, so they can realize. I think the people I work with, like Tucker and others, they would be pretty. I don't think they realize the volume of objects. I think they would be shocked.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely be happy to do that. It's interesting because we actually demoed this on classified networks back in September. Actually flew out to Vandenberg and sat down with some of my colleagues, and we actually got this to run on thin client virtual GPU. Let's be honest, really crappy systems. And it actually could show the entire catalog and show all of it, and none of the current government tools could do that at all. So it's very important when you're working with less than optimal systems, that you have software that's as optimized as possible so you can grasp the enormity of what you're trying to do. And when you have tools that the government currently has that can't even show the entire Starlink constellation, and these are supposed to be operational tools, and and they can't calculate when a site is going to be visible from 15 satellites. They just can't do it. It really is, it's an operational issue, which is why I am pushing to get this into ops as soon as we can.
We have a
So
lot of
that,
space
yeah.
force footwear or so footy. They're gonna wake up and use the particularly the fact that you built it in WebAssembly and loading in the browser. That's just such a great idea. Because web apps is so much easier to get accredited and get stuff deployed. So it's very exciting. So let's take two questions. I know we're out of time, but let's take two quick questions. You mentioned obviously orbital safety. Do you even track any company that care and are actively advocating for it? Because I'm not hearing any
Yeah,
meaningful company.
sure. I'll say probably the biggest one is Astroscale.
Yeah.
And they have,
Well, of course, it's their business model, so that's kind of
yeah, this is their business model. So I talked to the US
but
team.
what about people that are on the receiving end, right? People that are part of the problem, not the solution. Do you see anyone even talking about it?
Okay, so I do. And here's the conundrum. Behind the scenes, there is a lot of talk. I mean, it is fast and furious. You got people from
That's different from
everyone.
advocating publicly, right?
Yeah,
That's like
publicly,
chatter.
it's tough. It's tough because, man, how do I say this? Uh, the people with the most, they're causing the most problem, have the most to lose from admitting there is a problem. In other
Right.
words, if someone with a very large constellation comes forward and says, "Wow, we're really concerned about the amount of satellites we're
Right.
putting into space.
We're
You
gonna
better
stop.
regulate us."
Yeah, stop launching. Yeah.
Yeah, shareholders are going to be too happy about you leading the charge to regulate
Right.
yourselves when you're trying to move fast and break things. And I'll even go on record saying, I'm a huge believer in capitalism. I don't think it is anyone's responsibility to limit themselves. Go fast, break things. That's what the government's for. To give you those bounds in which you can do things safely. So having a good interchange between companies that are trying to develop at breakneck speed and get us capabilities as fast as they can, and the government who needs to step in and say, let's have a little more safety in the process. You need to hit these benchmarks. I think that's where the balance is. I don't really expect a lot of companies, when it's not in their immediate interest to do so, like Astroscale, stepping forward and addressing this publicly.
Yeah, no doubt. So last question for you. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, so I'm not going to do it.
Sure.
How much cost advantage does a SpaceX relaunchable rocket would have over other launching systems? It sounds like only a small part of the SpaceX rocket is reusable. Do you feel like it's a big win to have that reusability?
So here's the thing. Yes, I mean, I don't have any exact numbers, but where the advantage lies is not so much that it's reusable, which it's a big advantage, but it's being able to have a predictable ops cycle and being able to know that I'm able to launch this reusable thing X number of times in a month. So when you're having to produce a rocket that's single use, you have your entire supply chain that you have to worry about. So if you have a problem in your supply chain, that can hold up your launch, sometimes indefinitely. Being able to have reusable parts means that those are not dependent on your supply chain or the timing cycles of your vendors. So you're able to now be a little more predictable in when you can launch. That really is their advantage. In terms of cost advantage, I don't think it's in terms of cost advantage, like how much does it cost to create the piece that we're reusing. It's more of the cost advantage in how much can we simplify our scheduling process and what kind of discounts can we give to people who are trying to pack as many things as possible to send it into space, because we can give them a good schedule. If you have 15 different universities that want to launch their CubeSats, and you know for a fact that because your ops cycle is very steady, you're going to have a rocket going up every 10 days, then you can offer them discounts, which means they're more likely to do business and repeat business with you. So you can establish these economies of schedule and economies of scale that are not going to be available to vendors that are not using the reusable parts. And you see that right now with these CubeSat launch platforms, where they'll sell you 1U, 4U, spaces to launch your satellites, and they will give you these different launch prices, wherever the vendors are. And sometimes those prices vary wildly from vendor to vendor. And you would think in a capitalist market that you'd be able to do arbitrage between those prices, but you really can't, because everyone is so schedule constraint and supply chain constraint. This includes people that are building the payloads. So if you can take some of that out, I'm going to say an order of magnitude in terms of cost advantage and in terms of schedule advantage is really going to put them ahead of people that aren't doing that.
Yeah, plus they've been pretty steady also in not having issues with launches. So that
Yep,
helps.
absolutely. And yep.
I'm going to take a quick question before we let you do the parting words for everybody to say thank you. Patrick had a question more for me, I guess. He was asking, with AI based on open source information data, including all that junk and this information we see on the internet, how can you know that you're not getting the equivalent of a gossip GPT versus actual fact data science from AI? It's a great question, right? I think it's definitely something that we pay attention to. For ISH, for example, the fact that we can train data and give it additional context and track sources and show references and where stuff is coming from, I think that's definitely a great mitigation capability. What I find is, when we teach it the content we want it to learn from, it's pretty much going to use it. And so, at the very least, you can mitigate that. Nothing is perfect. You definitely want to trust but verify. We have a few engagements also with hallucinations to be able to detect them. But with the references and the training, what we find is that it's gonna do a great job. Now, do you still pay attention to bias and you still want to know better about the models? You know, and I think that's why Sage is agnostic to the large language model. We want to be able to use, the Dollys of the world, the Google Bard. We're going to have early access to Google Bard for DoD. We're going to have, Cohere. We have Cohere, we have OpenAI, and so on. So, ideally, with options, then people will be pushed to not have too much bias and stuff, and not try to do it on purpose, at least. And then, with the training we do on top, which by the way is agnostic to the model, so you can swap model without having to retrain and fine tune the models, which I think is great. I think that's going to really mitigate most of the issues. Now, trust but verify. That's kind of what I tell people. So, with that, first wanted to thank you, because you've done an amazing job to really explain to people what this is all about and the risk we're facing, and maybe people will be talking tomorrow a little bit more about collisions and the risk of ripple effect you talked about with complete destruction of all space objects. That will be interesting. I'm sure people will wake up after that one. But wanted to thank you for taking the time. This was awesome. Parting words are with you, so tell people where to find you if they want to reach out. Obviously, we put your LinkedIn, you're on LinkedIn as well. But over to you.
Sure. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, TJ Koury. I tweet infrequently, but I can definitely be reached there. TJ at digitalarsenal.io. And if you go to digitalarsenal.io, there's more contact information there. So if you have interest in any of these things, or if you're interested in using our globe in your product or for display purposes, let us know. And if you're interested in contributing to the open source standards initiatives that we're working on, spacedatastandards.org, and up in the upper right hand corner is a link to the GitHub repo where it's hosted. Feel free to open up an issue. Feel free to leave a comment, and the door is always open for having those conversations.
Here we go. With that, wanted to thanks everybody for joining. We'll see you in 2 weeks, not next week, but the week after, with an amazing guest from Microsoft joining us. I'm not going to tell you more than that. With that, I wanted to thank everybody, and make sure you keep up the good fight to ensure our kids have a fighting chance at winning against China 20 years from now. Stay safe. Bye-bye.